Hi folks, Andy here, and don't worry, that shining light above isn't the halo of God. It's just a light. Um, I'm just thinking back to a lot of these reviews I've done in the past. I didn't have like any titles to them, so there's a load of Guy and Smith books that I reviewed. In fact, the entire Crab series, which I really enjoyed, but I haven't added any headings to them, so anybody new to the channel won't know what they are. So I might have to go back and redo them, or at least add headings, just to sort of let people know what they're actually watching rather than well, what they are. So just a bit of a break in from Richard Lehman. Got quite a few. I think I've got 15 more Richard Lehman books to talk about yet. Good grief! But there's a load of other stuff that I'm reading at the same time. I've done more reading this year than I think I've ever done in my life. It's been an incredibly productive year for reading. And one book I want to talk about, it's a Guy and Smith book again, by the way, Werewolf by Moonlight, which was Guy's very first published novel back in 1974. Very pulpy horror novel, weighs in about 110 pages. It's pretty much the perfect length for this sort of thing. I mean, pulp horror is something that really appeals to me because it's very fast paced, predominantly all action. There's very little character development. There's very little structure in that sense because it doesn't need to be. It's just designed to be effectively the written version of I've always said with Guy and Smith, his writings come across like 50s B movies, which were always very short and very structured to the point of everything that was in there needed to be there. There's no fat or excess. But they had the sort of like sex and violence of like a 70s film nasty. And it just works. It just works really, really well. Great books. So I love the Crabs books. Killer Crabs from 1978 is probably the best, but the Charnel K's from 2019, which is one of the last 3 or 4 books he ever wrote. It's only 100 pages long. It's the last of the Crabs books, and it's an absolute riot. So if you haven't read them, really do. Anyway, Werewolf by Moonlight, the first book that Guy got published, and he never really, as far as I can tell, changed as an author. He didn't like have phases of greatness or learn his craft better. He always just wrote. And he just wrote a story, and he wrote everything freehand. He didn't have a computer. He didn't even type this stuff up. He wrote everything by hand, and then his publishers just knocked it up on a computer or typewriter or whatever it was. But Werewolf by Moonlight is the first of a trilogy of werewolf books. Although he did write more werewolf books, I'll get onto that soon enough. Featuring the same main character, who basically is a slightly alternative version of Guy. Is this guy who's portrayed as, he looks like Guy, but a more muscular, rugged version. He's a hunter. He has a dog. He walks around with a rifle. He's quick to temper. He's actually a very flawed protagonist. Not necessarily a likable character, which I like because he's not like this goody two shoes just hero. He's a guy who's got literally lots of questionable morals, and he's a womanizer, and he's a bit of a creep really, but he's also just a great fully rounded character, despite the fact there's very little characterization. Just feels believable. Anyway, he's a writer as well as a hunter, and it just so happens that there's a werewolf loose with the main character. The character becomes a werewolf. It's not a mystery. It's revealed early on who they are, but you get sort of like a bit more of an insight into their mindset and how they're a bit conflicted because they don't want to be a werewolf and they don't want to hurt anybody, but at the same time they sort of like cave into sort of bestial rage and lust with the things they do. And there's there's quite a few characters in this. It's the family of the person who's a werewolf who try and protect them. Another family. There's this woman who's married that the main character is trying to seduce. There's a police officer who's very grumpy. Quite a few. This is the sort of thing that I could imagine Amicus or Hammer would have made a movie of back in the late 50s, early 60s. Style. I mean, I know this was released in 1974, but you know what I mean. It's that style of thing very vivid, very fast paced, lots of action, lots of gore and violence and sex, and yes, it does. Guy does have a very limited palette of tricks, but they work really well. The one thing I will say about this book is that the ending and resolution is pretty disappointing, and people have mentioned this that in a lot of reviews I've read, whereby the actual way in which they defeat the werewolf is a bit anticlimactic. It's not the way you expect it to go, and it's a bit of a disappointment. But it's also that the more I thought about it, though, the more it kind of made sense that sometimes things don't necessarily have to end the way they would in a movie, with a big showdown. Sometimes something happens outside of your control, and that can end stuff, and that's how it plays out here, and it kind of does make sense like that. What I was a bit more disappointed with is the way in which certain characters in the story up until this point had behaved and then change instant at the end. In literally the last page or so, there's a whole bunch of character behaviours that just don't ring true with how they were for the rest of the book. And I thought it almost felt a little bit rushed at the end, which is a shame, because even though the ending is pretty rushed and not how I would have ended it, I think this is a really good book. I think it's a really solid debut novel, a great werewolf read, loads of action and stuff that you'd want from a werewolf book, and paved the way for Guy's career, really. I mean, it was Night of the Crabs in 1976 that made him an author of note so that he could actually become a full-time author as his profession. He was still working between 74 and 76, but this is the book that got him on the ladder, and caused 2 further sequels to come out, which I'll review in due course. I think it's Return of the Werewolf and Son of the Werewolf. We do have Night of the Werewolf as well, which is another one, separate book, but I'll talk about that later as well. I was reading that over Halloween. It's quite fun, and I just enjoy his writing, his style. I've not read anything by Guy so far, and I've been reading quite a few of his books that I'd ever say were bad. They're you have to keep your expectations low. They are just pulp horror, but the guy could write pulp horror, and he was fun. I think some people, his treatment of women in his books are mainly just objects. He doesn't write women well. That might put some people off. He was a product of his time, a bit like Layman, And I think the other thing is that Guy was a very sort of like keen hunter. So his talk about fox hunting and trapping and animals might rub some people up the wrong way, but Guy kind of does talk about animal conservation in some of his books, and whether you agree with his points or not, he's writing about characters, and the stories and ideas and opinions he has suit the characters. So that's all I'll say about that. But yeah, Werewolf by Moonlight, 1974, pulp horror book, about 110 odd pages to it. Read it in an afternoon. Well worth a read and a lot of fun. And I'd recommend you reading it. So that's a review done.